on the 12th of August, we will mark the International Youth Day, so quite a context of anniversaries. And in addition, we will speak the remainder of this year and the beginning of next year for sure, and I'm sure that in the next legislature as well, about this dual impact of the green and digital transitions. They are intertwined, they have a profound impact on the labor market. We will see a completely different landscape related to the labor market. And what is also important is that the context is even more fitting, and I think that we have in the room our rapporteur, Sarah. I've seen her earlier. Oh, she is, yeah, she's just in front of me. And we have an INI report by the European Parliament on job creation, the just transition and impact investment. Tomorrow we will have a discussion about it. So this is really a timely input into one of the reports that we are putting forward. Now, just to mention the fact that the entire discussion that we are having right now fits perfectly into a wider context in which we define both the governance, the economic governance, with the revamped reform and investment framework that we will negotiate probably until the end of this year. But at the same time, we have several files that we're discussing and were meant to discuss the impact on the labor market and related skills. One of the most important one would be the Net Zero Industry Act, in which our committee has exclusive competences related to skills. And I think that it is very clear that in this climate of change and ambition, we will see that the green and digital transition will bring a lot of positive effects, and we should talk more and more about these positive effects. But at the same time, there will be shifts. There will be job losses and reallocation of employment. No new jobs will be created, such as in clean energy, renovation, advanced technologies. At the same time, high level of labor shortages is actually happening right now, and job vacancy rates can be expected in 2013, 23 and 2024. And the questions are, what are the solutions that we have for these labor shortages? And what are the ways to ensure the availability of workforce for the jobs of the future? How can we make sure that the jobs and skills are future-proof for these transitions? We've been talking in Madrid at the informal EBSCO about the problem of workers in the care sector, the carers, and the fact that the working conditions are quite inadequate, and we have a massive shortage in that field, but that's happening in many other fields. And secondly, I would say that equally important for our committee, we will have not only the fact that will be demand supply related to the numbers of jobs, but the content of the jobs will be completely changed. There will be a different skill set. How we can ensure that these twin transitions are fair and just, and at the same time bring competitiveness, and what's the opportunity, how we can use this opportunity to create quality jobs with good working conditions in all sectors and regions across the EU, in order to have a balanced territorial development as well. So quite big questions, and I'm really pleased that we have today with us experts and representative of main actors, the social partners, the Commission and our agencies. On the social partners, Maxime was in Madrid with me, and we highlighted very, very clear that the role of the social partners is crucial, especially for broad development, social and economic development, but for the issues related to social policy and labor as well. So I will start by giving the floor to the invited guests. After 3 speakers, we will have time for questions and answers with members, and then I will invite the rest of the 4 speakers. I will also like, in the end of my introduction, to apologize for the mishap that we had in terms of not being able to have enough members last time. I'm really glad that right now we have the colleagues in the room, and you have accepted to give a chance again to this particular hearing, because it's really important. With that, with no further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker, Esther Goodwin-Brown. Esther leads the Circular Jobs Initiative. She's from Netherlands. She's working in the Netherlands, circular economy in Netherlands, and the work focuses on bringing labor market issue to, central to the agenda setting around circular economy and green policies. So, without that, with that, Esther, I think that you are connected online, and I see that there is a presentation that is right now on the screen, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much and good afternoon, and thank you for inviting us to have this exchange today about the relevance of circular economy to jobs and the green and digital transitions. Next slide, please. So in a circular economy, circular products and materials are kept in use for as long as possible at their highest value, and natural systems are regenerated. So it's a key tool for not only decarbonising the EU economy, but also retaining value and creating jobs and opportunities for Europeans. Next slide, please. And the employment opportunities promised by the circular economy are closely linked to its labour intensity, which we see increases as you move up the waste hierarchy from lower value processes like recycling that require fewer jobs to much higher value strategies like remanufacture and reuse that require much more labour. Next slide, please. I draw your attention to our definition of circular jobs, which was jointly developed with the UN Environment Programme. And here we take a broader definition than Eurostat's number of persons employed in recycling, repair, rental and reuse, to also include and thereby encourage the stimulation of circular economy activities in other sectors of the economy that can help to upscale and accelerate the core of the circular economy involved in closing material cycles and facilitate the use of circular products and services by businesses and consumers. So, for example, how can we increase the share of jobs in R&D or in digital technology that are directed towards circular activities in the economy and away from linear ones? Next slide, please. This also demonstrates that circular economy is both enabled by and supports the digital transition. Digital technologies can enable and accelerate circular practices like reuse and repair, and also help to optimise resource tracking and decision making. And the circular economy also in turn fosters innovation and new business models, thereby stimulating the digital economy. Next slide, please. And when we look at these shifts, as the Chair introduced, across sectors, the circular economy, and as the circular economy calls for a shift from material to labour-intensive activities, the largest projected job gains are seen in resource management, repair, maintenance services, and rebounds from consumer demand for sharing services. And the circular economy can also be used as a tool for reigniting previous active sectors, for example, in post-industrial areas, creating jobs, for example, through developing industries in remanufacturing in lagging regions. And member states that focus on creating domestic and regional product markets for circular products and services can also expect to benefit from local job creation. Next slide, please. From the employment gains projected from the circular economy at the international level, Europe is seen to benefit from a first mover advantage and resource sovereignty as it continues to build capacity for cycling resources in key strategic areas and cooperates with its partners outside of the EU. The number of jobs that have been recorded using the EU monitoring framework, for example, has in fact increased by 5% over the last 10 years. But the degree to which we see differences here between member states and these job losses and gains to be spread across will be dependent on some key enabling factors, including governance as already introduced and levels of adult education. Next slide, please. As the circular economy promotes the use and cycling of local and regional resources, it can encourage the creation of local jobs through the feedback loop it creates between different value chains and industry stakeholders. And with place-sensitive and more targeted policy packages that stimulate multiple sectors at once rather than solely focusing on recycling, research shows that job creation that comes with the circular economy can in fact be channeled to areas of underemployment, so thereby suggesting a route to level up the benefits of the European Green Deal between lagging and more prosperous regions. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to close with some points for your consideration about how to unlock the employment potential of the circular economy. because we see it coming through, but there is much more to gain. So firstly, on job quality, it's important to integrate social requirements, including social protection, into new policies to ensure that the circular economy, that jobs in the circular economy are safe, fairly paid, and that they have the same legal standards being upheld for circular economy sectors, including for emerging occupations. Targeted skills development towards lagging regions through vocational training and strengthening local employment services will help to redistribute these benefits within and across member states. On inclusion, we encourage the involvement of labour unions, local actors, including those that are currently part of the extractive industry and working in rural areas, in the design of circular economy policies to foster more social acceptance and inclusion. And finally, it's also vital that in the design of these policies, we invest in impact assessment to determine the impacts of EU circular economy policies on its trading partners to ensure the European Green Deal lives up to its promises of a just transition for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This was an exceptional timekeeping exercise. So it was 6 minutes on the clock. So I really appreciate that. But even more the content. And as Esther has already mentioned the importance of inclusion and involving labor unions, I will now like to give the floor to Ludovic Voet, Confederal Secretary at ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation. Ludovic is responsible, among others, for sustainable development and climate change, migration, youth policy, non-standard work and the platform economy, education and training, equality and non-discrimination. Ludovic, thank you very much. Good to have you here in the committee. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dragos. I'm really happy to have this discussion. I think it's a particularly important moment to have it now, as we are in the middle of a heat wave all over Europe and in the world. So it shows also the concrete effect of climate change, and it also allows us to think about the concrete effects of the climate change on the world of work, on the working conditions of workers, on the skills that are needed also to adapt to the new situation. So to discuss about future-proof jobs and skills is also discussing about the concrete realities of workers that are outside, that are in the summer, in the construction sector, in the public agents, the delivery riders, but also all the workers that need the support to get also the skills, so that their companies can continue to product without being disrupted by effects of climate change, be it floods, be it wildfires, etc. So this is the first point that I wanted to say, is that adaptation should also be at the core of the discussion on future-proofed jobs and skills. Secondly, we have, of course, also to discuss about mitigation measures, how to, for the green and digital transition, to transform the industries, and discussing in concrete about the transformation of these industries, not in broad level messages saying to workers that they have to adapt, they have to be flexible, or they have to be mobile. That's not delivering, discussing on broad terms, do not deliver the concrete solutions that companies and workers need. What workers need, it's to, of course, not be left behind, but also to see concrete strategies at national level, at European level, at company level, at sectoral level, and at regional level, in order to develop just transition strategies that would invest in quality jobs of tomorrow, that would disinvest in the brown industries, while making sure that these industries can be transformed. So these are concrete strategies that are being needed to be discussed in ecosystems, in industries like the cement industry, in the coal industry, in the aluminium, steel industry, etc. There's no one-size-fits-all when it's about discussing the decarbonation of these different industries that have different energy-intensive productions. So it needs, for that, I would focus on 3 elements. having a knowing what's the challenge of the transition needs a granular mapping of the change of jobs due to the digital and green transition in terms of employment, in terms of skills, and in terms of working conditions, not only at European level, but a granular mapping at regional level, at company level of the effects of the transformation, so that we can design policies and support to workers and companies, taking into account the possibilities of investment in regions and in companies, so that we can have we can avoid desertification of all regions or migration towards the richest country in the EU that would benefit the most from the transition. So we should avoid that we further increase the inequalities between our countries in the EU. Secondly, we need just transition strategies. I also said that at the beginning, but we need an enabling framework for just transition strategies to be done. So that's why we think with the trade union movement that we would need a directive that would focus on anticipation of change and management of change, that would reinforce workers' voice in anticipation of change, that would also focus on designing these concrete just transition strategies at all the level that I explained before. Finally, the third point, and it's a key point for both workers and for companies, it's the financial resources. Of course, the private sector will have also to invest a lot in the transformation, but we need to make sure that the financial resources are available to allow this transformation. We have a Just Transition Fund at the EU level that is too narrowed in its scope and also too limited in its financing, even if it was a good first start that was needed in 2019. We need to expand the efforts there. We need also to make sure that all the countries in the EU have the fiscal capacity to transform also their economies toward the green and digital transition. And when we look, the estimate only 4 countries in the EU are in the fiscal capacity to do that. So it links also to the discussion that you will have in the autumn on the Stability and Growth Pact. We should come back to fiscal rules that allow for investments to be done in the digital and green and social transition and would not lead to a comeback to austerity. Finally, a key point for us is that all these investments and all these policies that are put in place to support companies to transform in order to leave no worker behind should be done with social conditionalities, social and environmental conditionalities that make sure that public money that go to support private actors in the decarbonation do respect human rights, do respect due diligence, do respect labor standards, and make sure that the labor dimension and discrimination is at anti-discrimination is at the center to create quality jobs for the future for workers in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Ludovic. As we have a dialogue, there are 2 parties in a dialogue, so it's my great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Maxime Charuti, Director, Social Affairs Department, Business Europe. Maxime is responsible for a diverse portfolio of social affairs and labour market policy issues. He also coordinates Business Europe's engagement as social partner in the context of the European Social Dialogue. Without further ado, Maxime, good to see you again, very short after Madrid. Please, you have the floor.
Dear Dragos, it's a pleasure to see you again after Madrid indeed, and to all the members of this committee, it's a pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity to exchange. Of course, I also listened to Ludovic, who is presenting here for the trade unions, and with whom we are working closely on skills-related issues. I mean, of course, we are at the start of the European Year of Skills, which means that we are all now motivated in working together and making good way for concrete results. And on our side, Business Europe, we have recently published a statement which is providing an idea of what we think should be the priority going forward, which is relating to addressing labour and skill shortages. So perhaps to put the context, demography is the main paradigm change for us, which relates to the number of available people in our labour markets. In 2012, we had a working age population of 269 million people. In 2021, 264, so already a decrease of 5 million. And this means, in terms of employed people, a bit less than 200 million people who are employed in Europe. And the expectation is that we have a reduction due to growing cohorts of exiters for retirement on our labour markets, which are not compensated by enough young people coming into the labour market. 35 million people less in our working age population by 2050, when we are today 264, as I said. So that is, of course, a big number, and the consequences are felt differently across Europe in different countries in view of different demographic makeups, but everywhere it is an issue. And we think also that third country migrations play a useful role. So this needs to be part of the solution. On the other hand, there is an issue which should not be underestimated, which is a significantly lower employment participation of non-EU compared to EU citizens. It is 59.1% for non-EU and 74% for EU. And this gap, of course, is something that needs to be improved. We need to have more of the migrant populations from third countries participating in the labour markets. And I think it's very important that we look at both the internal and external dimensions of our labour market and skills needs, because, of course, what will be needed as solutions will need to work for our populations. And there is a need that is important enough to look into external, but we need to move together with the workers, with the governments, and that's why we are calling for an EU action plan. So the Commission, of course, is the one that is the main action actor to deliver such an action plan. But we think it should be done in a tripartite way, meaning very closely with the national governments and with the social partners. And we have identified 7 priority actions. The first action is to reduce inactivity rates in Europe. And on this, of course, we know, all of us, that we are speaking about a group of people that is very diversified. There are many women, there are migrants who are already in Europe, there are, of course, older workers, there are needs, young people not in education, training or employment. And it may be, of course, that the needs are different for different people, but there is a strong need to give a second chance to all these people that may have been discouraged at a certain point and that are not really actively looking for a job, but that are available to work and that need the support of society as well for a good number of them. So in order to do that, we think that it would be very important to have an initiative where the public employment services are going to work together with private employment services, and as part of this partnership to be reflected across Europe in the different countries and regions, that we are able to better reach out to the inactive groups and to provide tailored solutions for people, individuals, to be able to return to the labour markets. The second action is education and training reforms for a timely and effective updating of training curricula. The content of learning is crucial, and I think it was commented by Ludovic. Of course, we need to work on this as a priority, because this is where we will have the future competitiveness and improved working conditions in future at the same time. Chair, you were mentioning the Net Zero Industry Act, which is also noted on our side as an important initiative. What we need to avoid is to have an approach that is only limited to a number of sectors, but also to have an approach that is going to be respectful of the national competencies in terms of education and training systems and their functioning. And for that, we really think that there is more to do in terms of the member states' coordination connected to European semester, connected to activities of DG reform in the Commission to support the member states in improving their training curricula. The third action is to improve the recognition of skills and qualifications for non-regulated professions. And the fourth is to improve recognition for regulated professions. I speak about 2 actions because they are quite different. The first one is really a national competence. And there it's about trying to find ways of making the national systems for recognition better interoperable at European level. But for the EU, it's important to act on regulated professions because there is a directive and you can establish common training frameworks for these regulated professions to improve the mobility and improve the functioning of labour markets. I know time is already running, so I will be just saying a few last words on the external actions that are for us very important relating to our needs in Europe. I mean, there are two tools which the member states need to improve. One is the shortage occupation lists, which they are using to target migration and having a stronger focus on labour migration. And labour market test is also very important to, at the same time, make sure employers can have access to third country nationals in an effective way, but also making sure that the workers are confident that they have access to the jobs available and that there are fair solutions to improve the political acceptance of migration. Last point for us is entrepreneurship education, which we think is, of course, at the basis of our prosperity, and we encourage an action also on this. Thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to the debate.
Thank you. So 5 and 6, there were those 2 external actions, and 7 was entrepreneurship, just to be sure. Good. Good. Thank you. Now we have the time to have the honourable members in questions, and then we'll have the answers from the speakers. So we have 2 minutes per member slots for each of the political groups. I'm looking to see if there's anyone from EPP. If not, then S&D. If not, Renew. Sylvie Brunet, je t'en prie. Oui, oui.
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear Dragos, I have 2 questions. Mr. Cerruti, you were talking about the drop in the number of people working between now and 2050, and that drop is quite a large reduction. And I'm wondering whether you've already analysed the impact of everything that's digital and the fact that there will be jobs lost. I don't know, is this going to be compensated, offset somehow? So has there been any quantitative analysis of this trend? Because we know there's the green transition, the digital transition, so that's the first question, although I realise it's probably quite complex to carry out such analysis. Secondly, you talked about the importance of labour from third countries. We know that there is a European summit ongoing at the moment. There's a lot of talk about the migration pact. So is this an issue that that is being addressed? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Sylvie. I'm looking to see if Sarah would like to intervene. So please, Sarah, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for these very interesting contributions to the debate. And indeed, the chair already mentioned it as a rapporteur on our INI on green jobs, just transition and impact investments is really a very important topic to me. And I think, well, we really need to anticipate the green and digital transition today and not tomorrow. And of course, that will pose some risks, but I think we can really turn them into opportunities to make sure that we actually create more better and really locally embedded jobs. But maybe more specifically to Ms. Brown, you mentioned, of course, the importance of job quality. So it's not just a question of the numbers of jobs that we see that are possible within circular economy due to, indeed, the labor intensity and the fact that we go and reuse, remanufacture, etc., a lot more than we do right now. What do you think is really key to make sure that we have a good job quality in these new and emerging sectors? How can we make sure that that is the case? You also mentioned the importance of impact assessments. One of the things that I'm asking for within the report is really to have a social impact assessment on all our green policies. Do you think that would actually be helpful and that would make a real difference? Maybe to Ludovic, I think we agree that within the transition, and of course you've mentioned it, In some sectors, jobs will change or get lost. What do you think is really needed when it comes to social safety nets? What are specific policy measures you have in mind to make sure that these people are indeed not left behind? One of the ideas that we have been playing with is a sort of job guarantee scheme. Do you think when you do something like that regionally, that could really make a difference? And of course, when it comes to the financing, indeed, on social conditionality, I think we have to have that on all those specific investments for sure. And then maybe to Business Europe, you mentioned the importance of reducing the inactivity rates. I'm wondering what concrete things could be added, perhaps, to make sure that indeed, for instance, women could be activated. Do you agree that, for instance, more investments in childcare can really make a difference there? Recognition of skills, indeed, you mentioned. And maybe more generally, I think if we're not careful or without intervention, the transition right now risks to be quite male-dominated. How can we make sure that gender equality is really an equal and integral part of our green economy strategies? And then maybe finally, one of the things that we want to put forward is mandatory just transition plans on a company level, so that's both with the workers and the employees equally in the driver's seat. Would you support such an idea coming from Business Europe?
Thank you very much, dear Sarah. I'm looking to see if there are questions from behalf of ECR. Would the coordinator, Elżbieta, would like? Yes, please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have one question for the speaker who started off by the situation of those workers who are working outside, for example, in the construction sector, or seasonal workers working on farms, which is a very hot issue. So obviously, what are the possibilities of swift change in the case of these kind of challenges? You were talking about transition and a just and fair transition. We do know what the plans are, we know what the budget is, so perhaps you can tell us whether there is going to be a just and fair transition and whether this is going to revive the labour market, especially for those who may lose their jobs. And here in particular, I'm thinking of the older workers, i.e. people who are over the age of 50, because obviously it's going to be far more difficult for them to either reskill or upskill and to be able to find jobs that are paid equally as well as the ones they had. So this is the whole issue of the reskilling, retraining of these workers. And from your own experience and looking at the activities of young people in trade unions, so this is... I'd like to know whether you feel that young people are thinking in terms of joining trade unions and what is the main aspect. Are they still interested in joining trade unions? And then from the representative of Business Europe, there are two very important issues when it comes to the labour market. First of all, there's demography. We can't change anything about that or remove that issue. And then, of course, immigration, which could be a solution to the problem of a lack of workers on the labour market. So, Mrs. Cerruti, you put forward a kind of work plan or programme, and you mentioned a couple certain steps. So which of these steps is the most important? Which would be the most effective to see immigrant workers on the labour market? You've said that there is a very low participation on the labour market of certain workers? Is there immigrant workers? Is there a difference between men and women? Is there the possibility of people wishing to educate and train or improving their skills, for example, when it comes to women on the labour market? And what about the kind of skills? And this for Mrs. Goodwin-Brown. You were talking about skills. Do we have good national practices which could be shared and disseminated to different countries? Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. So thank you very much. We will now go back to the experts and we will start in the same order. So Esther Goodwin-Brown, Esther, you have the floor. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for the question. So firstly, on job quality, so we see that this is a particular need where we need to look at the current jobs in the circular economy or in sectors that we expect to see increased demand for labour as a result of the circular economy, so that we know that as we boost labour in these sectors and demand for it, that we're boosting the right type of jobs. This is something that our organisation, Circular Economy, is going to be embarking on with the International Labour Organization and the World Bank through a new initiative we launched in June. And we would welcome cooperation from European Union stakeholders to help ensure that those achievements really do translate into good quality jobs in the circular economy in Europe. This is also because in a recent study we conducted, we found that existing analysis on the quality of jobs in the circular economy is quite narrow. It's largely focused on operational health and safety and other aspects of decent work, like fair remuneration and social dialogue, are not addressed. So we really encourage looking at the full breadth of decent work aspects, taking inspiration from the ILO's framework. On impact assessments, I do believe that social impact assessments are incredibly vital, and particularly to help assess which circular economy policies and interventions can lead to the most favourable economic and social outcomes, as we really see that the focus of a lot of the circular economy agenda and policy design so far has been a focus on the technical cycles first, and retrofitting what are the labour requirements and skills needed next. But we really need to ensure that the needs of people, their skills are integrated ex ante into the design of these policies. Some of what will happen with the digital transition and the circular economy is seen as an unknown, but we do know a fair amount. We have these big ambitions of the European Green Deal, the Circular Economy Action Plan, which we use as a guide. We can really be proactive in building in the right sorts of indicators and measures to ensure social impact is positive. And when it comes to national practices for skills, this is indeed something we encourage, is sharing within regional clusters and within countries with similar ambitions or similar economic structures to really look at what is and isn't working. A lot of focus has been recently on the importance of the vocational training system and how not only the education system works, but how local and national government and its agencies are, at what capacity they have to work with the education system to ensure that the right sorts of measures are in place where we still see labour shortages, but also where we see the need for employment.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the particular issue of VET would be tackled a little bit later on because we have with us Cedefop and Antonio Ranieri. Let me move to the social partners, and I will start with Ludovic. Ludovic, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, and Thank you. Thanks for the questions. So I would like to react on also linked to the question of Sylvie Brunet to Business Europe. I think on the discussion on shortages, indeed, there's in the transition there will also be in some sectors the transformation will lead to less labor-intensive jobs. So it might also mean that there will be a need for less workers in some of the jobs. In some sectors, there will be also important increase of productivity linked to digitalization. So it's also not completely sure that the number of active people in Europe will be that will be needed will be also taking into account the circular economy, the positive impact of energy savings also on jobs. It might also disintensify jobs so that also workers can live with a workload that is also possible. So I think that's an important point that we have to take into account. Migration, of course, has to continue to exist with regular pathways for labor migration, but with making sure that quality jobs and that there's no ground for labor exploitation in this. To the question of Sarah Mathieu, I think that yes, here I think it's really important to have strong safety nets to reinforce social protection systems in all member states to make sure that the transition will be possible for workers. A job guarantee can, of course, be discussed. I think the most effective tools have to be designed with the social partners. For example, the element of upskilling and reskilling will be at the center of the transformation. But for this, you need also to anticipate. So meaning that we need to know, and we support your demand of having just transition strategies at company level, because you need to know what will be the jobs and skills need in 5 years in order to train and to make the workers comfortable to enter in training so that they can stay in the same company. If it's not possible in the same company, that they can stay in the same sector. And if this is not possible, then thinking about safety nets that would, with a job guarantee, maybe help them on the longer term to go to another sector. But the more you can secure that people stay in their sectors, the better it is also because that's where their skills are developed. On the question of MEP Rafalska, I think on the question of the temperature, it's also an important topic that we have to tackle now. For example, with legislation that would ensure that there's maximum temperature at work for construction sector. It's key. As Mr. Pislaru said, he was last week in Madrid. I was also a few days before. It was 40 degrees. I was seeing delivery riders in the streets with no protection link to the job. So that's where we should have discussions on the need to have equipment for workers or also temperature over which you cannot work, as we have also in safety nets for minimum temperature under which you cannot work. So I think this is an important point. And to finalize, just transition. For the moment, no, there's no just transition. There's a transition, but we have the time to we need to put urgently in place the frameworks that would make sure that everyone can have to be secure in the quality jobs in the transition. And this is what we wait from policymakers in the year to come, so that the decarbonation will mean also quality jobs for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we right now move to to Business Europe and to Maxime Ceruti. Maxime, please.
Thanks, Dragos. So thanks for the questions to Sylvie Brunet. First, relating to digitalization and the potential in terms of having productivity improvement that could compensate for less people. I mean, first we have an agreement as social partners on digitalization of 2020 on digitalization, and really the premise is to make this transition as employment creating as possible. So the intention is to do a transition that is going to be positive in employment results. On the other hand, of course, when we look at productivity improvements, we need to tap the potential of technology to support productivity improvements, and that is clear. So we need to work on that. But I think when we look at the current levels of shortages and when we see the demographic trends coming ahead of us, I think we can expect we are going to face issues. So we need to work on it. That's why for us it's a key priority to have this action plan. And on migration, I mean, what is quite positive, I think, in the very recent past is that you have this new initiative of a talent pool. And the talent pool is an initiative that is really focused on labor migration. And this is really about identifying people from third countries who are willing to come to Europe for work. So, you know, there are different routes to migration to Europe, and some of them are European ones, some of them are national ones. Here it's really a European coordination which is focused on labor migration. And so I think it has potential in increasing the levels of employment participation of migrants in future. And that's why we are very supportive of this initiative. Then to comment on some of the points by Sarah Mathieu. So just first to highlight that, of course, gender equality is important, and we need to work on it in different ways. But for us, there are two good ways when it comes to participation in different sectors and also in terms of skills. I mean, we have very different levels of participation of men and women in different sectors. And that is something we are flagging for many years. It would be good to have more equal representation of men and women across sectors. That's the first point. The second is we don't have enough women in STEM, scientific, technological, engineering and mathematics. And there we have proposed a target for 2030 to have 25% of graduates, tertiary graduates, as a target, which would go through having many more women to participate so that we move from the 21% of today. Then in terms of just transition, I think it is, of course, an important issue, but I don't think we need to have plans that are set up in this way. I think you have information and consultation bodies in the companies that are specifically aiming to do this kind of consultations with the workers. Of course, it is not specific to just transition, but just transition issues can very well be taken up into these information and consultation bodies. And so there I think it's important that there is a dialogue and culture of cooperation in the companies, but I think it's better done through the existing channels that are there and to make good use of them. And of course, childcare. We are very supportive. We think it's very important to have more women participating in employment. A few things perhaps also to highlight on reduction of inactivity rates where it could work. I think there are different things that can be very helpful. One is improving guidance services, having better information for people to make their choices of education and training and know where the jobs are when they do these choices. Second, apprenticeships for adults. We have a culture of apprenticeships that is for centuries in Europe, and it works well to connect to the labour market needs and to have good employability of the apprentices getting into jobs. So that is working well, but we need to scale it up. We need to open it to adults. And in many countries, it's not yet the case. So it's really a good way of progressing as well. Employers are fully committed. We are providing for 90% of the investments every year in adults' education and training participation. So that is very high level. But I think as we have the objective of having more in future, I think there needs to be some progress also there, and incentives by policymakers to employers to invest in skills are very important for the future. So we are also looking into this. And perhaps the last thing to highlight also to my colleague Ludovic, I have brought some reports, which is the outcome of a joint project of the social partners, which is a project on skills, innovation, and the provision of and access to training. It is 1 or 2 years ago, but it's very relevant, and we encourage you to take one. I have taken 10 only, but please feel free.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the three speakers for this very interesting part of the debate, and we right now move to the interventions of experts and researchers from our agencies, Cedefop, Eurofound, and ELA, and also, last but certainly not least, OECD. So let me just give the floor to Antonio Rainieri, Head of Departments for Vocation, Education, Training and Skills, Cedefop. Antonio manages a team of experts investigating skill trends and changes in the world of work, exactly what we are talking here, and support the development and implementation of the Union policy in the field of vocation, education and training. So without further ado, we are really interested to hear you. Antonio, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Let me check if it works, this one. Okay. too fast. Okay, we are ready. So just to say that I have to say I share the previous speakers, I mean the chair, Maxime, Ludovic, because I mean this comprehensive approach, because the first point to make maybe is that the approach that we have to take addressing the issue should take into account that the green and the digital transition are part of a broader process of change that we are experiencing. So skilling our people is important in general. I mean, is important in Europe more than in other geopolitical contexts because two things basically. The one that mentioned Maxime, the demography, so the population aging, and I would say also our weak productivity growth. So we shouldn't forget that the skilling, fixing the skills challenge we have is not an end per se. I mean, it's important for many reasons, but is also essential for to solving the productivity issue that we have in Europe. This is maybe the starting point. In our forecast, I can show you just, yes. In our forecast, we can see, I mean, that we have a growing, in the future, growing highly skilled professions that, of course, will continue to grow even in the next years. But there is another point also that is very visible, and that, I mean, as you can see, the vast majority of the job openings of the future will be for replacement needs. So it means that this will affect basically all areas of the occupational ladder. So the first point to make is that this broad area of broad-based nature of the future jobs is a key message for education and training policy. Needless to say, let's go to the digitalization. Needless to say that the digital, of course, has a major role in changing currently the labor market. We don't believe that there is a direct risk of job losses as a consequence of the digitalization. What we see is a task displacement type of effect that can lead indirectly to a problem in terms of employment, but this is not, in our view, the main point of concern. We see that this type of task displacement may affect, on the basis of our estimate, about 1/3 of the European workers. And so this is something that can affect especially some groups, for example, males, for the reason we said before, lower educated, some people in occupations that are of low level of skills in general. But I mean, the good news is that we also see, how can I say, a task regeneration, because so new tasks, new ways of doing things related to digitalization. And we actually see that for most of the workers, the point is more related to the creation of new tasks rather than to the destruction of existing tasks. Sorry. All this to say that, of course, the consequences of this process will be, for instance, you see that number, 45% is the number of European workers that acknowledge that the changes currently due to the digitalization will entail a substantial upskilling and reskilling. So it's something that is important and something that, of course, has implications for our policy. Let's go to the other point about the greening. Here, I mean, today I guess is more clear to everyone why the green transition is important, and including to reinforce Europe's independence from some external factors. And it's clear also that the greening of the economy has implications. In our scenarios, we see that apart from the positive effect in terms of course, prevention and also reduction of future costs for remedial action, etc., we also see overall a positive effect in terms of employment. So we see an increase overall in the long term in terms of employment. In our case, we estimated 2.5 million as a net employment effect, but I mean 3 million, 2 million, 1 million. The point is not the number, but the idea is that the overall, the net effect will be positive. In the short and medium term, things are a bit different. We may have ups and downs. We may have in the short term also, of course, not every area of the economy will be affected in a positive way, not every sector, not every region. This is quite clear. This is why we have a special responsibility. As you can see from the pie there also, where the color represents the, how can I say, the degree of greenification of the different areas of the labor market here in terms of job demands. As you can see, we have even for the areas of the economy where we have the strongest greenification of the market, we have, yes, high qualified demand for high qualified jobs, but also for medium skilled manual, semi-manual occupations. So, as I said, we see a special responsibility in the case of the greening of the economy, stronger, I would say, than in the case of the digitalization. And there are a number of actions that we can do, that in some countries we started to do with the new plan, with the resilience and the recovery plan. We know that a large share of the money is on green, is on digital. There are many things that we can do in the short term, in the long term. Here we have some examples. Maybe the last point to make is that, I mean, many of the things that we should do in the long term are things that we should do anyway to improve the ability of our education and training system to be more responsive to the greening of the economy, to the digitalization, to the financial crisis, to the COVID and the pandemic, to be able to respond in a better way to the needs of an evolving and continuously changing labor market.
Thank you very much. I think that these presentations are really opening up the debate. I mean, there are so many things that we should tackle. I mean, I have this feeling of scratching the surface just of what's there, and even a couple of hours are not enough to even comprehend the variety of issues that we are having. So thank you very much, Antonio, for underlying this vet perspective on things. Let me then invite Tina Weber, Research Manager from Eurofound. Tina is working on issues such as labor shortages, telework and the right to disconnect, policy measures to mitigate the impact of the pandemic of the labor market and wider society, flexibilization of the labor market and measures to address gaps in social protection and the involvement of European Works Council in restructuring. So Tina, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Dragos, for this invitation to present at this important hearing some of the findings of Eurofound research, particularly on labour shortages, but also on the employment impact of the green and digital transition. Next slide, please. On the digital transition, initially, there are, and there have been for a long time, structural shortages in the ICT sector and in relation to digital skills. And in fact, during the pandemic, these have only been aggravated further. And although there has been a growth in employment in this sector already, the EU is still very short of the 20 million additional experts in this field that are going to be needed by 2030, and these are particularly in areas such as big data analysis, cyber security, and so on. As you will see from this slide, in 2020, 6% of European enterprises had hard-to-fill vacancies that required ICT specialist skills, and that's an increase of almost 3.5 percentage points since 2014. And The job vacancy rate in the ICT sector has also increased in all EU countries, with a few minor exceptions like Ireland, Greece and Croatia. And there are also significant differences here between countries depending on the demand in the labour market for these kind of skills. But that's against the background that Eurostat data shows that in 2021, only 54% of European adults had basic digital skills, and the target set for Europe for 2030 is 80%. So there is still a long way to go, and again, very significant differences between countries. So only 28% of adults in Romania have these basic digital skills compared to almost 80% in Finland and the Netherlands. Next slide, please. I also want to come back to the impact of the green agenda. Eurofound recently carried out a study looking at the impact of the Fit for 55 package, and that echoed a little bit what the colleague from Cedefop has just said, that the overall employment impact is in the region of a positive growth of 1 million to 2.5 million jobs. But of course, that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be interruption for individuals in the labour market. As you will see on the next slide, please, there will be job losses and job growth in somewhat different sectors. So, for example, job losses are going to be found in areas like mining and agriculture. The main growth is going to be in the services sector and in construction. And interestingly, primarily in the low paid and the higher paid spectrum. So that's also something to be taken into account. Next slide, please. And in fact, I will skip this one. So if you go directly to the next slide, which shows that we have some work to do in order to overcome challenges, because there is still somewhat of a lack of an access to training. So close to half of employees received some kind of training financed by their employer in the last 12 months. But again, there are significant differences between countries, and maybe more importantly, differences between workers in different groups. So younger workers and older workers in particularly, and importantly, lower skilled workers and those on fixed term and temporary contracts are much less likely to have access to on-the-job training, which is so important to keep developing skills. Next slide, please. I just want to emphasize something briefly that has already been said by a number of speakers. It's not just about additional education and training. An important driver of labour shortage is also job quality, and this shows that occupations and sectors which are most strained tend to have the greatest labour shortages. On the final slide, you just see the three areas that Eurofound would outline, if you can move to the next slide, where policy action can be taken, but this depends very much on what the drivers of shortage are. And many of these have already been mentioned, so I won't go into detail. We need to do more work to enhance attractiveness in particular sectors. We need to activate underutilised labour, a point very strongly made also by Maxime, and we need to make better use of existing labour by improving education and training systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for indicating a few areas for policy actions. I think that it's really fitting to understand that the data converge to some extent, and you've provided some segregated data as well. So let me move to Irene Mandel, Head of Unit Information and EURES at ELA. Irene is a Head of Unit of the unit called Information at EURES. She is well placed to speak about labor shortages because it's about mobility and sending people from one member state to the other. Before joining ELA, Irene worked in a policy-oriented socio-economic research in the fields of employment and labor market, as well as entrepreneurship and industry analysis at Eurofound. Irene, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you for the invitation, having the possibility of also contributing with some background information to this certainly very relevant debate. Let me just give you a brief introduction or recap. You might be aware the European Labour Authority is the youngest of the employment agencies. It was established in 2019, and by next year it is planned to have the full capacity of conducting all the activities. And one of the activities that ELA has been tasked with is the European coordination of EURES, which is a network of public and private employment services in 31 countries, so even going beyond the European Union. And one of the tasks of EURES, it doesn't work. This direction, okay, so now it works. One of the mandates of EURES is that the EURES regulation of 2016 implies that EURES is providing regular information about labor shortages and surpluses, including digging deeper, for example, analyzing the impact of specific sectors, specific regions, or vulnerable groups in the labor market. And so far, this has been done by an annual report since 2016. The latest version, which deals with the developments of 2022, has been published this March, so it's comparatively recent, comparatively fresh. And you also have here the link and the QR code where you can download it if you want to learn more. And the new feature that was added this year to the report was an interactive online data dashboard where you can dig even deeper into the data that was collected and see yourself in which countries, in which sectors, in which occupations there have been identified shortages and surpluses. And we aim to work further on both the presentation of the data, but also the quality of the data and also the meaningfulness in terms of making it more analytical rather than just descriptive. Now, what the latest data found is that the main occupations that have been identified across Europe as shortages are kind of clustered in 4 big areas, which is construction, IT, care, notably healthcare, and more recently HoReCa. And within those top shortages occupation, we see some of the elements that previous speakers have already mentioned. We see some gender segregation, notably an underrepresentation of female workers in these shortages, which for their long-term labor market integration is not the most positive sign. We see in several, not all, but in several of these main shortages occupations, underrepresentation of young people. That means there is a good indication that these shortages will aggravate in the future when the current workforce retires and we don't have enough young people to follow in those occupations. And we also not necessarily see these shortages only at the high-skilled level in these occupations, but rather at the medium level, notably the ones which are driven by vocational education and apprenticeships. Now, making the link to what do we know for the shortages, have they been caused by which particular factors? That again was a feature that was newly introduced in this report series in the latest version. And we find there that a large number of these shortages occupation, they appear on the list year after year, so they are structural, they come back ever and ever again, mainly driven by demographic change, working conditions and other elements that previous speakers have been discussed. But we also see that some of the shortages have been caused by temporary shocks, like the war in Ukraine, COVID, or similar developments. And we also can see that some of the shortages are quite directly linked to technological change and digitalization, occupation, as well as the transition to a climate-neutral economy. So as regards to digitalization, we see here the typical suspects of software engineers and IT specialists, while for greening, we see a little bit more of a mix. On the one hand, we see the change in occupation, as was mentioned by Antonio, but then we also see the new occupations emerging, for which at the time being there is not yet sufficient labor available to fill these gaps. And also from my side, a few considerations, what could be discussed in terms of policies or recommendations, some food for thought. From what I have said before, as we see that there is some gender segregation in the shortages and in the surplus occupations, in spite of all the work that has already been done in education, but also in labor market integration policies, there still could be room for breaking up these gender stereotypes in occupations. And that could be done both in education and training, but also, for example, in career guidance. So a role of public and private employment services to incentivize people to go there for different options. A second point, as we have seen, this dominance in the shortages occupations, not necessarily in the highly skilled ones, but in the medium skilled occupations, that there could be further encouragement of vocational education and training, as well as company-based trainings like apprenticeships. Also by making them more attractive, by also here further debreaking the stereotypes of that they might be of lower value than a university-based education and elements like this. And a third idea, probably not that surprising to come from ELA, being tasked with facilitating labor mobility. Another solution could be to look at mobility as a solution. This could be occupational mobility, but it could also be regional or spatial mobility, either within a country or cross-border. And with that, I stop and look forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Irene. Last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce the next speaker, Glenda Quintini from the OECD. Glenda leads the skills work at OECD's Skills and Employability Division, looking at how skills needs are changing the labor market and identifying effective policy responses, particularly in the area of adult learning and on-the-job training, issues that have already been touched here. So with that, I would kindly invite Glenda, and we are really glad to have her in this committee. So you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let's move directly to the next slide. I guess by being the last, I'm going to repeat some of the things that have already been said. I'll try to give it a new spin, but you'll hear a bit of the same. So first of all, I wanted to look at the impact of the digital and green transitions on job content and on skills demand. And I think someone made a very good point before. Esther, I think, made a very good point that very often we have not gone straight to the impact of the transition on jobs and on skills. And so for a few years, in fact, we've seen the focus being very much on away from the labor market implications. So it's good that now we're focusing on that. Next slide. Now, in terms of digitalization, I think perhaps something to add to what has been said so far is that things are changing a lot. So with the advent of AI, a lot of our previous thinking about what jobs might be affected by digitalization, and with this, I certainly agree with the people who have spoken before that we're not so much talking about jobs completely disappearing, but we're talking about the tasks changing, and as a result, people having to adapt to new tasks and having to acquire new skills. And I think what we've seen in particular with the advent of artificial intelligence is that some trends have strengthened, so those bottlenecks that were not fully automatable before, such as, for example, the ability to work in cramped spaces, awkward positions, finger dexterity. So some types of very precise, let's say, manual skills that were not automatable now are fully automatable. There is now skills that are automatable and tasks that are automatable that belong to higher skilled occupations, such as, for example, even deductive and inductive reasoning, even some aspects of creativity, for example. And there are still bottlenecks that remain, even in the age of AI, although things are changing very quickly, and those are all the tasks related to complex problem solving, to high-level management, to social interactions. Now, next slide, please. So if we talk about the green transition, we know that also will involve important changes in the labor market and as a result in the skills that are in demand. So the green policies, we estimate, will involve job losses and skills redundancy, of course, in some sectors like emission incentive intensive sectors, including even relatively high paid jobs, and an increase in the demand for skills for green sector. We've heard about the circular economy, then there's renewable energy, organic agriculture, recycling of waste products, for example. So in this respect, also countries and firms need to promote the reallocation of resources between jobs and also the training of workers between jobs and also the training of workers within jobs, which are changing. Next slide, please. What we still don't know very clearly, and I think I haven't heard very compelling arguments from my colleagues either, is whether the green transition is going to bring about the same level of massive upskilling that we expect from the digital transition. So the jobs being destroyed, we can see, are generally low-skilled manual jobs, but the jobs being created, and I think I've heard that from the previous speakers, tend to be middle-skilled jobs, technician jobs, so not necessarily very, very high-skilled jobs. And in a way, this brings me to a point that's been made before, that we need to be more precise about what jobs are being created, what skills are being required. I think Ludovic was mentioning that, this granular information, both in terms of having precise information, but also granular at the geographical level, so at the regional level, is going to be extremely important. Next slide, please. And some of the shortages are already emerging. I won't spend a lot of time on this. I think the people giving presentations before me have been very clear on what are the shortages at the moment. I would like to perhaps add that a lot of the shortages we're seeing now were also pre-existing the pandemic, although the pandemic has magnified, the recovery that's been so fast has magnified some of those shortages. They remain predominantly in skills that are STEM, that are medicine, for example, knowledge, digital skill, teaching knowledge as well, and then we have surpluses primarily on physical skills. Now, next slide. So if we think of the next slide again, actually, let's go straight into it. If we think about the let's say the challenge in terms of adult learning, I want to focus specifically on adults. What we see at the moment is that most of the jobs in shortage are high skilled. So on average in the EU, it's about 60% of shortage occupations that are high skilled, and in some countries it's even larger than that. Next slide. And what we see is, in fact, big differences across socio-demographic groups. Again, this has been highlighted before, so I won't spend a lot of time there, but there are very, very big differences in participation in lifelong learning, access to new careers across groups, notably between the low-skilled and the high-skilled, but also between age groups. Next slide, please. And now to conclude, so in terms of adult learning, what do we see as the main solution? I think there's two aspects of coverage of participation in adult learning that we very often refer to. One is overall participation, and the other one is the involvement of groups that are currently underrepresented, which would increase participation overall. I think there's an important issue to be considered, that these groups generally face very high barriers when participating in in training. For example, they don't have time to train. That's often the biggest barrier. Financial barriers, for example. So modular training courses that address time and distance barrier, training leave to take time off work, and financial incentives are very important. And then, of course, Maxine has already said how involved employers are in providing training, but it's also important to support them further, particularly small and medium enterprises, to provide more training. Second, training needs to be aligned to the needs that are emerging. It seems obvious, but it's not always the case. So it's important, again, I go back to the point of collecting and using information on current and future skill needs that is accurate, that is granular, and then designing specific programs for those adults whose skills are becoming obsolete. And finally, of course, there's an issue of quality. So adult learning and training is only useful insofar as it is actually of good quality, and so designing quality assurance frameworks, but also collecting information on what works best, what type of training gives the best cost-benefit ratio is very important, and we do that still too little. And I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, you've added on top of the sectoral perspective, the skills perspective, including non-formal skills, or actually including attitudes and things like that, which is, I think, a very relevant part of the debate. And I wish to have more opportunities to talk about that in the European Year of Skills. But with that, let me address my colleagues in the room and see if there are any questions that they would like to ask you. So I will go again in the order of political groups. And if Sarah would like to intervene, then, of course, we will be glad to hear her question. Sarah, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to our panelists for participating in this important hearing. I would say that an increased recognition of skills is, of course, one of the key issues when it comes to deepening the single market in order to increase European competitiveness and create more and also better paid jobs. And I think in light of this, I wonder if the panelists would have any actions or reforms in the area of validation and recognition of qualifications and credentials between the member states that they would see as key in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm then going to renew. Je t'en prie, Sylvie.
Merci beaucoup. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. And I would like to thank the members of the panel for these extremely interesting presentations. We've learned a lot from all of them. I have a first question. I think it was Mrs. Weber who referred to this, but I was quite struck by the fact that there are considerable differences between member states, especially when it comes to the level of digital skills. This is an enormous challenge because a lot of our European citizens obviously are not even at the level of basic digital skills. But we see that certain member states are far more advanced. Do we know why this is? Should we draw lessons from this, positive lessons from certain member states where there is more progress? So I don't know whether this is linked to things like mobility or just access to transport, access to networks. Because obviously in certain rural areas we know that there is less access to these kind of services, less access to digital services. So this is, as I said, that was something that struck me. The second question I have, which I could address to all the speakers, do you have any information and data specifically on access to women to training, more than men? Because in France I've done a lot of work on this particular subject, and we have seen that it's less easy for women to have access to vocational training during their lives for various reasons. For example, more tasks when it comes to children. It's not as easy for them to organize vocational training. And I think this is a decisive factor, a decisive element. And this perhaps explains why there are differences in pay and also differences in access to certain professions. So I don't know whether you have any figures when it comes to the difference between men and women. And then finally, do you have any information or elements relating to investment? And here I'm thinking in particular, Madam, when it comes to working conditions, i.e. investment in working conditions to improve working conditions. In the case of certain jobs, we know that there is a shortage, and there is always this question relating to working conditions. And obviously, everything that's digital could have an impact and make certain jobs less hard, as it were.
Then check if first I'm going to do the tour and coming back. So I will check with the Greens group and Sarah Matthias, coordinator, please, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks a lot for your very valuable contributions. And I think it's clear in the year of skills, of course, that this is a key issue, that upskilling, reskilling, lifelong learning are indeed crucial elements to make sure that our twin transition succeeds. And of course, that means that we need to get the labour market ready, and that there will be a growing need to provide education and training in those areas that are linked to skill gaps in the current labour markets, and of course also in the future-oriented sectors. But I'm wondering if you agree, and in that sense, the numbers that were mentioned when it comes to the presentation of Ms. Weber, Eurofound, there's still a lot of people that don't have access to training, actually. If you would agree that if we want to take this reskilling agenda serious, that the right to such a training should really be an individual right, and lifelong learning should be part of it, and that the right to training should also include paid educational leave, so that we really make sure that the training doesn't impair, for instance, the right to rest or to their salaries. And also maybe to just highlight, because of course skills, I agree, they are very important, but at the same time, if I listen very carefully to what both Eurofound and Cedefop say, we know that a lot of the labour shortages that we are seeing today are indeed particularly prevalent in those sectors where we have poor job quality, where we have the challenging working conditions, and so on. And at the same time, I think it's a study of Cedefop actually that showed that about 39% of adult EU employees are today overskilled and actually trapped in low-quality jobs. So how do we make sure, when we are talking about this reskilling agenda, that we really invest in the right skills, and we make sure that people actually end up in good quality jobs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just move then to the ECR group, asking the coordinator, Elżbieta Rafalska, if she has any questions, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I would really like... Yes, I do have some questions. I would really like to thank the speakers for their presentations on the changes that are taking place on the labour market, because it allows us to have a very overall view of what's going on. So obviously we've seen that these are quite major changes that are taking place, but fundamentally the nature of work is changing, which means that the type of employment is going to change. And then, of course, the social aspect. There are lots of young workers. We've seen all these dynamic changes, for example, like digitalization. So the young workers are probably going to be more flexible, more mobile. But when it comes to workers who have been working for 40 years, then it's going to be more difficult for them. They are obviously trying to make progress when it comes to digital skills, but it's at a more basic level. So I think there is a need for a reform of education, trying to solve the problems that we face in education and training, because obviously we have to ensure that people can adapt to what's happening on the labour market, or in the young people. They have to be properly trained. But then for the older workers who have been working already for a longer period, then obviously the way they adapt is going to be different. We've heard that on the labour market, 5 million workers, and we're going to need even more, a further 2.5 million in this particular sector. So that's an enormous gap. And retraining, I don't think, or skilling is necessarily going to help us. So in the IT sector, it's going to be very difficult to fill the gap. There's the demographic aspect, and we know that the birth rate is falling in very many countries. And I would like to go on to agree with the colleague who was talking about the large difference that exists between different member states, because there is a kind of technological delay in certain countries. They're a bit further behind. So we've got all these different factors and these inequalities which seem to be becoming ever deeper between the member states at this level. But this has to be taken into account at the level of the European Union, because we have to solve the problem of cheaper and worse quality labour. I think the final presentation that we heard was taking a look at basic training, the kind of barriers or obstacles to training or retraining, especially when it comes to higher education. So I think obviously we have to try and solve that at the earlier stages of training. If we take a look at the challenges that are facing us, they're so fundamental that we really have to do something at the decision-making level. I don't know, together with Commissioner Schmidt, so that we can approach this in the right way. So I think that really should be a subject for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me then ask if there are any other members that would like to comment or put some questions. If yes, please, but try to stick in the 2 minutes. Thank you.
Pues una pregunta para el señor.
Well, I wanted to ask Mr. Ranieri, on the slide, you say 62% of professionals do not request green skills, or very few. So 2/3 of professional workers only that's a small amount of people having been part of the green transition. So it's 2/3 of the economy. Based on your presentation, it gives me the impression that the green and digital transition is being improvised as we go along. You say there are no professionals who can carry out these tasks, or there are not enough professionals. So how long is it going to take until we get the professionals that can help us with these transitions? Do you not think it's a bit late? And these objectives are very ambitious. We've seen that we have shortcomings in technology, but we don't have the worker profiles to fill those posts. And what is the role of universities, technological universities? Why are we not asking them for help? I get the impression we're not asking them because they are fully aware of the demands of the labour market. It seems that we're artificially pushing towards these areas without involving the population. You talk about migration as a solution. It gives the impression that there are people outside our territory that have these skills. So why do we not adapt to the objectives of the transition? So we adapt them to the until we have the technologies or they're sufficiently mature. It seems to be quite difficult. Perhaps we need to be more demanding. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. So right now we are moving towards the end part of our discussion. We will have the answers by the distinguished experts. I would kindly ask them to try to, I know it's complicated because of a wide range of questions, but to try to fit in 3 minutes. And then I will invite also the European Commission for their views on the entire debate. So let me start in the same order. I will give the floor to Antonio Ranieri. Please, Antonio.
In a sense, it's quite simple to wrap up in one answer, because the solution of all solutions is that we decide in Europe that in every country we would like to set up a system of continuing training and adult learning that is open, accessible to all people, exactly as we have decided a few decades ago to do with young people, for whom it's totally normal at a certain age to train, to study, to learn. Is totally normal, and this is not always something that has always existed. I mean, we decided at a certain point that that was something to do. And maybe in front of the changes that are tangible for all of us also in our life, is not only something, a theory or some study that tell us that the reality of the societies and the economies changes continuously, quickly. The point is no longer that you now have to change many times job over time, but that your job changes every day and continuously. So we need to equip ourselves with something that will be useful for the greening of the economy, for the digitalization, for the disruption that will come from Mars, I don't know, whatever, because we need something systematic. So this is the solution, so to speak, to everything. I don't know, okay, I still have 1 minute and a half, because one point is also, if we manage to catch up, I mean, with the changes, and because some of the solutions are, it takes time to set up a new system. Recognition, validation, I don't know who was, what Sarah was mentioning, maybe the point is something that of course is useful and would be also a quick solution for the problem that we have, but it's not quick to set up the system of recognition and validation. If you have not done in the last 20 years, probably you don't have it even now for the situation that we have to tackle today. So this is another example why we need to think big, in a sense, to think that we need to set up in almost every, I mean, we have really few exceptions where we can say here in a country, a member states where we have a continuing training and adult learning system. We have bits and pieces somewhere, but the real systems are missing almost everywhere.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a systemic solution, and indeed also we had two Sarahs. So Sarah Skutadal asked about the recognition of credentials. So just to clarify that, let me move further. Tina Weber, Eurofound. So Tina, what's your take on the questions or ideas that the members have asked, and also if you would like to make your final conclusions?
Thank you very much. I will focus on the questions that were more directed to my presentation. First of all, I was checking, and I would recommend for those of you who are interested in this, the latest version of the European Working Conditions Telephone Survey. There was a question about the access of men and women to training. And if you look at the data visualization for that, there's only a small difference at the EU level in terms of men and women that have had access to training paid by their employer over the last 12 months. It's only 1 percentage point. but it's very different from country to country. So, for example, for Italy, there is a 10 percentage point difference with many more men than women having had access to training paid for by their employer. So if you're interested in that data, I would encourage you to look on the Eurofound website. There's a very good data visualization of the EWCTS data. Then there was a question about the data I presented on the difference in digital skills among the adult population. I imagine there are very many different reasons for this, one relating to the level of broadband and other technology access at the country level, the level of urban and rural divide, but also the level of this kind of training provision already within the school system. We know that in many countries there's also a lack of trainers specifically for digital skills. And then it's also linked to the requirements of the labour market for those types of skills. There was a question about how working conditions can be improved. Of course, the first reaction is always that there should be an improvement of salaries, and of course that is the case and has happened in some countries. There are examples of that, but very often you find that is not enough. And there are also other ways of improving working conditions. For example, more and more individuals are looking for greater flexibility in relation to their working arrangements. When you look at vacancy notices now, more and more people want a hybrid type working arrangement, want more flexibility in their working time. And we found with the policies that we studied that when pay was improved, when the area of the country was not attractive because of infrastructure difficulties, a lack of investment, and still increasing pay is not sufficient. So I think I'll leave it there in terms of the questions more directly addressed to me.
Thank you very much, dear Tina. And we move to Irene Mandel, EURES Unit ELA. Please, Irene.
Thank you. I would like to respond to the question about how can we ensure that we are investing in the right skills. Here, my point would be that there is actually surprisingly little data, little hard facts available to really identify and measure which occupations, which skills are in shortage, which are in surplus. So here a first recommendation would be to put more effort in data collection, in measurement, in monitoring, in labour market intelligence. And this not only for today, but also for the future. So also an anticipatory, forward-looking identifying of the needs, also taking into account that it takes time. There are not that many low-skilled professions in shortage that can be done by anyone, anytime. So also the medium level needs some time to be acquired. So to have a kind of a buffer period, to also then, as a next step, when we know what is needed, to also work on awareness raising. To notably addressing the young people or those that are in risk of having skills that are to become obsolete, to work more here to create their knowledge about what might be needed for them in the future to have a sustainable and future-proof job. Also here the point of the career guidance comes in again. And as a third level, as to this regard, would be then maybe even stronger involvement of the education system. So I think also here the last years have seen a lot of more cooperation between the economy and the education system to adjust. But notably, when we are talking about small and medium-sized enterprises, they probably don't have that close access to universities, or there might be more barriers for those two type of actors to cooperate. So there could be some work done. And a second question that I want to briefly touch upon is the question about migration as a solution. So from a labour market economics logic, it would be a kind of a step-by-step process. First, you would go for activating the resources, the people that you have in the country, in the region, by either using them more or by and upskilling them. Second step would then be fostering mobility within the country, which either could be occupational or regional. Then you would have the cross-border mobility within Europe, and only then as the last step there would come the third country nationals as a solution. That said, from the data that we have from our labor shortages and surplus report, notably those most structural shortages that come ever and ever again, they are also very common in the different member states. So here this mobility within a country or cross-border within the EU probably will not solve the issue, so there would be some need for third country migration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we move to Glenda Quintini from OECD. So please, Glenda, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Very interesting questions. I think I start from seconding, I'd say, what Alberto was saying, right? Which also goes to answer one of the questions, which was, is the solution then to have a right to lifelong learning? And I think, in this context, of course, as Alberto was saying, Antonio was saying, that we need to have adult learning systems in every country that are set up, that are open to everybody. We shouldn't forget, though, that the biggest barrier for most adults approaching training is the fact that they find it very difficult to navigate the options that are open to them, that they don't necessarily see the value of training for themselves, that they don't think, maybe they perceive also some of the barriers that as being too high for them to retrain. So I think, although the rise to training and the availability of effective adult learning systems is going to be very important for the majority, we still will need some sort of some mechanism to outreach, to engage with those who are currently receiving the least training. The same goes for the validation and recognition of prior learning. Certainly it is essential. Many countries have set it up over the past few years, but very few people use it. So the issue remains. Of course, most countries are trying, especially those who are setting it up from scratch, but also those who have a system that's not being used. They are trying to make it more user-friendly. They're trying to simplify it. But again, this role of outreach and the role of career guidance, as Irene was saying just before, is very important, because we need to help those who do these things the least to navigate the system. There were also questions about some of the groups. So there were questions about gender, the questions about older workers. I think I certainly agree with the speaker from Eurofound, who was saying that the differences by gender are very small, except in some countries. On average, they are small, and in many European countries are quite small. But what we see is different barriers. So I didn't go into a lot of detail, but the number one barrier that people cite when they're not training is they say they didn't have time, either for work reason or for personal reasons. And women tend to face more barriers due to personal responsibilities, family responsibilities in general. So I think it's important to think of for example, design, support that covers indirect costs, which could be for some women, especially from underrepresented groups, so who have cumulative disadvantage, like who are also low skilled, for example, and low wage if they're working, then to also cover some of the indirect costs, like, for example, childcare, transport, and so on and so forth. The discussion for older workers, I think, is interesting, because on the one hand, it is true they participate in training a lot less, but I think we have to be conscious of the fact that we are calling it lifelong learning, but we shouldn't wait until people are old to retrain them. So I go back to the idea that lifelong learning has to be continuous, and so hopefully we don't get, for the new generation, to them being in a highest age group and not having received the training they need to keep their skills up to speed. And then maybe one last point on investing in the right skills. I think Irene again was mentioning that. I think I would like to underscore here the issue of investing in skills instead of investing in training for specific occupations. And on the one hand, this is important because we are all trying to make adult learning system more flexible with modular training, which facilitates participation by adults because it takes less time to just retrain for a specific skill or for a specific skill gap. But also because it makes sure that we're not investing on specific jobs that now we think in 30 years are going to be in short. And that's very difficult to predict the future, as I'm sure all of you realize. But if we invest in the skills that enable people to transition between jobs, then we are making an investment that's very valuable.
Yes, thank you very much. Indeed, basically, we're not investing in jobs. I would say that investing in skills means investing in people, more or less. So that's the thing that we are actually trying to promote here in the European Parliament as well. I would like right now to thank again the speakers and to try to have the view of the European Commission. We have Chiara Rondino, Vocational Education Training, DG Ample, Cedefop unit in the European Commission. So Chiara, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for organizing this very interesting debate, and to all the speakers and to the people, to the MEPs who intervened. Of course, it's very timely and relevant for our European Year of Skills, so it's a very important debate that we are having now. I will not react to everything. I will stick to my 5 minutes, but I would like to first of all talk about this framework, this comprehensive framework for the green transition. There was a call earlier on in the debate for such a framework. I would like to say we do have such a framework at European level. It's the Council recommendation on fair transitions to a climate neutrality that was adopted last year, and it has different policy packages. Skills is, of course, one of these policy packages, but we have also many other things that cover several of the elements that have been mentioned. For example, active labour market policies and working conditions, skills, as I said, including career guidance, tax benefit and social protections, which also cover things like investments in childcare, healthcare, long-term care, that we have seen are important barriers to the participation in training and in the labour market of certain categories, especially women. We have also access to essential services, including housing. So it is a very comprehensive framework, and I think Ludovic will also be happy to know that there is a very strong call to member states to work in close cooperation with social partners when they develop and implement these policy packages. And also, of course, funding. And it's true we have the Just Transition Fund, but we also like to recall that we have hundreds of billions of euro in the resilience facility, in the European Social Fund, the European Regional Development Fund. So we're really seeing also how member states are mobilizing all of these EU funds and also investing in their national funds. Then I would like to conclude on the barriers and the relevance to training. And in this case, I would like first to thank and congratulate the Parliament for the resolution on vocational training as an element for employee success and as a building block for the European economy in the new Industry 4.0, because it showcases the importance of that with very important recommendations also, and we have seen that vocational training is particularly in demand in some shortage occupation. And I would also like to say that responding also to some of the barriers and also to the relevance of training, we have other two important tools, among others, at EU level, which are the micro-credentials, as also the OECD and Glenda was mentioning the need for modularity, and these are also trainings that are more accessible to people because they can really be taken at their own pace, in their own time, and it's easier to put it and mix it into the work and family life, and in line with one's ideas for progression in their jobs and careers, and the individual learning accounts, which is a very powerful instrument that puts really the individual at the center of their own training decisions, again, to try and break down these barriers. And then, of course, I very much also agree with the points of looking at education and training as a continuum, so we don't have to wait for people to be in the labor market with not enough skills or not the relevant skills. We need to start early on. We need to invest in a kind of transferable skills that will help people to adapt, and then we need really to continue throughout life, and this is really at the core of the European Euro skills. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the European Commission, to Chiara Riondino. We are at the end of our debate. I still feel that we have only scratched the surface. The debate is very, very fruitful, and I think that it's clear that we are not talking about just the quantity of jobs, but the quality of jobs that has been outlined by several of the distinguished speakers. I think that it's clear that we should not forget that when we talk about skills and jobs, these are not just abstract statistics. These are statistics about people that have their lives, their constraints, their difficulties in pushing further. If we are to go more philosophical today, and the purpose of what we do here is the pursuit of happiness and good governance, then it's a very important thing how the future of skills would actually affect the motivation, the passion of people to pursue those skills. So we are talking here mostly about the fact that with a decent compensation, that makes the job as a good job. But I mean, it's not necessarily clear. If you are well paid, it's not immediately meaning that this is actually a fulfilling job. So there are some further consideration that goes in the area of philosophy and psychology. And one of the things that I'm reading these days, and again, I had a ton of questions myself, but we will leave that for future interactions, is that it seems that we are somehow moving a little bit from STEM-oriented understanding of reality to a more arts and humanities understanding of humanity. I think that that AI processes these days have actually triggered quite interesting debates about the need for philosophers and psychologists and anthropologists. So that's kind of an interesting thing. We have pushed and pushed and pushed technical skills and so on, and right now we need to push more for what makes humanity what it is. So this is even I would say even more at stake than just the accounting and statistics and moving people from here to there. I think that this debate that we are talking about these days on skills, and it's about how we rearrange our society to face the challenges that we are having right now and to pursue the ambition. And this is really something that we should dedicate time, energy, research, effort, money into it. I really appreciate, and I would like to thank again the speakers, Esther Goodwin-Brown, Ludovic Föth, Maxim Ceruti, Antonio Ranieri, Tina Weber, Irene Mandel, Grenda Contini, and of course Chiara Riondino as well from the Commission for their participation. I would like to thank my colleagues that have made it until the end of the schedule, and I know how busy things are right now before the summer. I think that this is really a nice thing to have before the summer, some food for thought. And then, of course, we need to come back again with a lot of energy and try to come up with solutions or things that can actually improve the lives of the people and give a better chance for having both a competitive and a fair economy and socio-economic development. So with that being said, I really believe that this debate was really valuable. I'm really glad that it was recorded so people can find it, and your presentations, dear experts, are really interesting, and you have left a legacy with that. So everyone that would like to look further into the details of our discussion can do that by watching that online. With that, again, thank you very much. I would like to thank the Secretariat and the interpreters for their work until quite late in the afternoon. And let's make it happen, the kind of change that we are talking about today. And I'm looking forward to seeing a bright future that we can maybe shape together. Thank you very much. Thank you. And with that, this concludes this session, this part of the session of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee, and we are going to restart tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Thank you.